Hello, my science lovers. This particular series is part of the Scientist Mel Shorts. It's a shortened version of my Science of content for those of you who love science but are short on time. Today we're going to talk about GMOs. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, so today our topic is GMO. So what are we going to do with that? We are going to talk about what is it, why do we do it, how does it work, and all of the potential issues associated with GMO. So what is GMO? Well, it's called a genetically modified organism where genes are altered not by nature, and we can do this with both related and non-related species. So if you check out the World Health Organization, they have a fantastic website, and they talk about genetically modified organisms where we're talking about plants, animals, microorganisms, where the genetic material, DNA, has been changed in a way that doesn't occur naturally in nature. And they can do this by mating, or what we call recombination. Now, often we see this in modern biotechnology. It could be called gene technology. It's also called recombinant DNA technology or even genetic engineering. Now, this allows us to take certain individual genes that do have a particular trait, and we can transfer it from one organism into another organism. Now, the organisms can be related or they can be non-related because guess what? The genetic code is universal, and those little ribosomes that read the genetic code that put together the proteins, they don't know that a particular gene is bacterial or that another one yeast or that another one is plant or animal. They're just going to read the code and make the protein. So that's why this works. Now, foods processed using genetic modification, they're sometimes referred to GM foods, GMOs, and or genetically engineered food. So to touch a little bit on something called part of artificial selection. Artificial selection is how we have larger crops, larger cows, more milk-making cows. Farmers have been altering genes through crossbreeding plants and selecting for desired traits for thousands of years. This is what we see when farmers and breeders have been doing in agriculture for like thousands and thousands of years. Now, this is only with related species. Now, artificial selection isn't necessarily considered GMO. However, GMO just takes this process a bit further and kind of expedites it. So why in the world do we do this genetically modified organisms? Why are we doing this? Why is it important and why do we care? Well, one good point is sustainability. So some topics that I'm going to cover with this is sustainability, enhancing biodiversity, improving soil, reducing carbon dioxide footprints. It conserves water, and it also kind of mitigates what we call nutrient pollution. So these are 6 different ways that we see GMO that's helpful. Here, let me make my screen a bit smaller. There you go. Enhance biodiversity, reduces CO2, mitigates nutrient pollution, sustainability, improves soil, and conserves water. So I'm going to talk a little bit for a second about all of these different things. All right, so larger crops with less land means we don't have to mow down so many forests in order to generate land that we can use to farm. Insect-resistant crops provide pest control that is targeted towards problematic bugs, but not important ones like pollinators. Now, adding the benefit of herbicide-tolerant plants means fewer pesticide applications on particular plots of farmland. And with global warming being an issue, generating drought-tolerant plants is crucial. Conservation tilling instead of soil tilling allows plant remnants to be left on top of the soil and seeds placed within that plant soil residue becoming mulch. Now, with regular traditional tilling, farmers bust up the land, and that requires more water, and it also releases a lot of CO2 in the atmosphere. Now, advances in GMO that lead towards conservation tilling also reduces these CO2 emissions. Furthermore, All of these practices also conserve water, as less tilling and drought-tolerant plants means less water is used. There are plants being developed right now in regards to nitrogen uptake, because the thing is a lot of plants right now, they take a long time to uptake nitrogen, and that's a crucial nutrient for them, and they slowly absorb it. Now, scientists are working on plants to be able to uptake them more readily and have it absorb, which means farmers won't have to purchase so much nitrogen, and there's also less nitrogen runoff into surrounding water supplies, which can be a pollutant. Now let's look at humans. Human population is increasing. GMOs provide larger crops and food for less money. With climate change and global warming on an increasing trend, food will likely become more expensive. GMO is going to be necessary in order to combat the rapid change in climate to help plants in surviving and adapting to quick changes. See, the problem with all of this climate change is that normally with traditional natural selection, those sorts of adaptations take a long period of time. GMO is going to be crucial in order to help plants adapt more readily and quickly. So this particular image that I have here, this comes to us from harvard.edu, and I'm going to break down all of these steps for you, but I want to kind of give a shout out to Harvard for this really awesome graphic. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about each step in regards to how GMO works. First, step 1 and step 2. Step 1, we got to identify a trait of interest. In step 2, we got to isolate the genetic trait of interest. So how do we do this? Well, critically thinking and a little bit of luck is how researchers find a desirable trait in a plant or organism. One example is an herbicide-tolerant bacteria that could survive in the presence of Roundup. Now, by applying this gene for this trait to specific plants, it allows these plants to survive in the presence of herbicide. So the herbicide then targets the unwanted plants, but the genetically modified ones survive. Another example with this involves rice that has a gene to make what we call provitamin A, and provitamin A can be altered in the body to vitamin A. So by applying this gene to a widely used crop, like corn for example, it could aid in meeting the needs of communities who have a deficiency of that particular vitamin. Genetic analysis, step 2. Now this is required in order to isolate the portion of an organism's genome in order to determine which gene controls the interest, the trait of interest. So let's talk a little bit more about this technology. So there is a genetic database that allows some help in determining what each gene does. However, if there's no information for a particular trait-gene combo, scientists can knock out and or delete a gene to see the effect on protein expression. If they take the gene out, does the trait show up or not? So if that trait does not show up, they know they have found the right gene. Now, one technology that they use is called seed chipping. I believe Monsanto came up with this. This allows scientists to take a slice of a seed to perform genetic analysis while allowing enough of the seed to remain intact to use for planting. Now, this aids in generating a genetic database to help cross-reference traits and genes to allow ease in finding which trait goes with which gene. Now, the thing that's cool about that is while they're analyzing the DNA, they can drop that little seed in a pot and watch it grow so they can see, did we alter that gene? Let me see. Yes, it's correct. Let's see what happens. So it allows a bit more of an expedited process in order to analyze genetic expression and whether or not a particular plant has that gene show up. So the next 2 steps and how it works. Step 3 and step 4. Step 3, insert the desired trait into the new genome. And they use what we call plasmid, bacteria and plasmids. Because bacteria, unlike us multicellular organisms, are single cellular organisms and their DNA is just free floating, so it's really easy to manipulate. Now after that, they can use a gene gun that shoots DNA-coated metal particles into the seed. Sounds a bit like a sci-fi movie, doesn't it? Or they can use bacteria, kind of like a Trojan horse, to insert these particular genetic changes within the seed. After that, they have to grow the GMO in order to determine whether or not it can survive and what its needs are. So what does all this mean? Gene gun, you say? Wow. Well, the thing is, plants are not so easy to genetically modify. They do have cell walls and rigidity that has to be overcome. So a combination of genetically modified bacteria using DNA, we also have nanoparticles and a sci-fi sounding gene gun, kind of help with that process. Now, when using the gene gun, seeds are blasted with .22 caliber charges, forcing that gene into the plants. Now, a few companies don't really do this anymore. They instead use a modified bacteria that act like a Trojan horse to invade cells with a new gene, allowing it to enter into the plant's genetic code. Now, some people will be like, oh no, bacteria. Remember, there's beneficial bacteria too, and bacteria has been altering plants naturally for a long time anyway. So what happens once that's altered? Once the genome has been altered, researchers double check that only the gene of interest has been changed, and correctly at that. Once that passes inspection, the plants are studied under strict conditions to determine how well they reproduce and survive. There is even technology that Monsanto generated that tracks optimal seeding and growth conditions in order to generate the best possible outcome for these GMOs. This also gives further insight to farmers as to how to plant these seeds and upkeep them to get the highest chance for the best yield. And the makers of these seeds actually give this information to the farmers to kind of help boost them and show them how to grow it. So now we're going to talk about GMO issues. Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. If you've not seen that cheesy 70s film, go check it out. I thought those of you who might have might appreciate this little GIF image. So I need to tell you, in the U.S., farm animals are not GMO. Now, there are some concerns in regards to potential biodiversity breach with GMOs infiltrating wild-type versions of organisms. And I should say that there's no real human harm found with GMOs. So what does this mean? What does the science say? Let's talk about that a little bit. Okay, so there is some concern that modifying plants causes potential health issues for individuals. Now, these issues primarily focus on allergens and gene transfer from GM foods to the body, for example, gut bacteria. Some concern arises in regard to antibiotic resistance in gene transfer, but the probability of gene transfer from foods to human cells is exceedingly low. GMOs that do not have gene transfer associated with antibiotic resistance is encouraged in regards to that type of genetic modification. Now, most countries have stringent guidelines and investigations associated with GMOs. These regulatory bodies look at how the organism is affected, if it changes the overall organism to an unrecognizable state, if there are any toxic aspects because of the gene modification, as well as any other potential health issues that can arise. Now, the last issue that is a concern involves outcrossing to plants in the wild. Essentially, GMO plants breeding with wild plants. That is a concern there. So containment is essential. Now, there may also be an indirect effect on food safety and security when conventional seeds get mixed with GMO seeds and are fed to animals. Now, our GMOs, for the most part, you know, if it's plants, it's probably not a big issue in regard to feeding it to animals, but there's some food that's made just for humans. And so there is some concern that if we mix this up too much with animals, it might cause problems, food safety and security, but there are different countries that are working to limit that. Now, I should note that not all countries are strict with GMOs, but the World Health Organization does work with all countries to try to develop regulations as well as help out in understanding GMOs and what they need to be looking for. Now, in regards to science, in 2014, an analysis of GMO studies was published. The authors combed through 10 years of GMO research and found that GMO foods did not pose any risk on humans in the 10 years worth of studies that have been performed on them. So I'm going to show you a graphic from one of those, and the good news is this particular paper does not have a firewall, or not a firewall, a paywall. And so here is an overview of the last 10 years of genetically engineered crop safety research. That is the title of the paper. Now these are all of the papers that they looked at. And so what's important to note here is they didn't just focus on one particular aspect. They focused on lots of different aspects. Food and feed. So people eating it as food and animals consuming it as feed. They looked at environmental impact. They looked at health. They looked at traceability. They looked at biodiversity, wild relatives, coexistence. They looked at soil. They looked at all of these different aspects of how GMO can affect the environment, animals, people, all of these things. And you notice the number of papers that they had here. Primarily, there's a lot of them that focused on biodiversity because that is a real concern, is our GMOs intermingling with wild type organisms. So I'm going to read to you the very last sentence of this particular paper that they had. They say essentially, we believe that genetic engineering and GE crops, genetically engineered crops, should be considered important options in the efforts towards sustainable agricultural production. Our collection of specific records is available to researchers, communicators, and teachers at all levels to help create an informed and balanced public perception on the hot issue of GE use in agriculture. So this paper is available for you to read. It's not a hard read. It's very well put together. Have a look at it and educate yourself on GMOs. Now, as an aside, the public perception of GMO is a substantial concern as people push against what they think is unnatural. But what people need to understand at this point is that we are doing to the environment and have been doing to the environment was never natural and hasn't been for thousands of years. With the push in climate change affecting crops globally, GMO has become a necessity. We cannot afford to pick and choose what we consider natural and unnatural in a world where we have contaminated our planet through blatant excess and pollution. If we are to survive, we need to understand our current state of the world and work to better the planet. We have changed our world in many ways, and many of them are not natural. And furthermore, nature wants to kill us. The more toxic we create our planet, the more we have to modify the genetic code in order to adapt and survive. Natural selection takes a long time. We don't have a long time. This happens with our basic necessities. We have to genetically modify our food in order to conserve water and have sustainability for agriculture. So that has been GMOs. What did we do today? We talked about what is it? Why do it? How does it work? What are the potential issues? All of these things we've discussed today, and I'm so glad that you're able to take this little bit with me. So here are my sources. If you can't read these all, that's okay. Fear not. They're available on scientistmail.com. You can download all of my slides and dig a bit further and read everything associated with that. And I hope you do. And so now I'm just wrapping up in the end. I'm going to thank my patrons here. If you like what I do, please consider being one of my patrons on patreon.com. Tony, James, Lauren, Jen, Carl, Melanie, Patrick, Daniel, Paula, Tim, Carrie, Cersei, Keith, Zachary, Tony, Graham, Dragnot, Godless Iowan, Jennifer, Corey, and Heavy. Thank you for contributing to my Patreon. You help me keep the lights on. They start at just $1 a month, and they get extra stuff and behind-the-scenes stuff and all kinds of other things just by contributing. They get early access to my audio podcast when I upload an episode, and they help me do what I do because of their work and because of their contributions. I'm able to have a website and up all of the quality of my stuff. It's wonderful. Thank you guys. You mean the world to me. And if you want to find me, you can find me anywhere on the internet. Just Google scientistmail.com, patreon.com, Periscope, YouTube, Facebook. And that has been the science of GMOs. shorts, the short version. The short version. So this was GMO Shorts. I want to thank you for being here, and just check out my other videos and subscribe if you like what I do here. Thank you so much, guys. Have a fantastic day, and I will see you on the next episode.